So welcome again, everybody, to Animal Think Tank's webinar for this month. Today, we're going to be talking about our latest narrative research and how persuasive narratives have the power to really make a difference in social movements. By the end of this hour, I'm hoping that we're all going to be able to come away with an understanding of the power of narratives, of narrative in general, and an understanding of the narratives we've uncovered for animal freedom that are persuasive. I also want to be able to provide you with resources to use in your own campaigns in the form of our messaging guide and research report. But before I get into that, I'll begin by explaining who we are for those of you who may not be familiar with us. Okay. So we're Animal Think Tank, and we're a social movement think tank focused on animal freedom and animal rights in the UK. We're a little different from most think tanks. That's because we like to think of ourselves as a think and do tank. So we put our research into practice within the movement. And we do that with four main focus areas. Our long-term strategy, so thinking about potential campaigns, milestones, and our overall objective. Also, what we're going to look at today, particularly narrative, how we change the dominant narrative about our relationship with other animals. Organization, how we organize and build power within the movement. And finally, culture, and that's the culture that we're creating to ensure that we're all leaders, we're all supporting one another, and we're all resilient enough to do this work for as long as it takes. Today, then, we're going to be talking about narrative change and story-based strategy. A lot of our research has been analysing other social movements in terms of their long-term strategy and how they change the narrative about a particular issue. We've looked at many historical movements so far. We've looked at the civil rights movement, the Indian independence movement, and also more current movements like the Together for Yes campaign, which successfully repealed the Irish abortion ban. We're looking at Extinction Rebellion, Sunrise, a youth climate group in the US. We're looking at Black Lives Matter, as well as our own movement and campaigns, such as the Brightling Sea campaign, and that successfully ended the live export from that town. For those who aren't familiar, I'm going to be talking now about story-based strategy. And that's a framework that recognizes that strategy and narrative go hand in hand. So we need to have a long-term strategy for how we can change dominant harmful narratives in society. And we also need to be thinking about the stories that we're telling within our campaigns and thinking about what's called the action logic. This is essentially thinking about how would a passerby interpret any action? What would they understand when they see that as the story that we're trying to communicate? For example, if they see people liberating injured animals from a factory farm, that's telling quite a simple and quite a powerful story. But if they see a lot of people blocking a road, they might not really understand why they're doing it, you know, what the logic is of that action, how that sort of fits in narratively. So it's a really useful framework for us to be thinking about when we're planning actions and campaigns and thinking about how we communicate. A really good example of a campaign that used story-based strategy to really good effect is the Freedom to Marry campaign that's on screen right now. And that was the US campaign for marriage equality. And it's been a big inspiration for us at ATT. Oh. Tech again is being difficult for us, I'm afraid. Aha, perfect. So the Freedom to Marry campaign had a winning strategy. They knew that they needed to legitimize gay love, and that to do that, they needed to legalize gay marriage. So they created a roadmap for how they'd win marriage equality in all 50 US states. The problem was that they were yet to find their winning narrative. Over years of campaigning, polling barely changed. The US public, they were just not in favour of marriage equality. In fact, they were told by an experienced and respected US pollster, campaigners were told, you'll never see gay marriage in your lifetime. But they didn't let that deter them, because they knew they had a solid strategy in place and they needed to understand why people were opposed to marriage equality. So through doing public research, they found that their own communications were holding them back. People didn't really understand why gay people wanted to get married when they already had civil partnerships. In a lot of people's minds, it was conjuring up this very legal frame, and many believed it was just to sort of get tax breaks. And talking about tax breaks was actually something they'd been saying in their own comms, so it was sort of inadvertently sort of strengthening that narrative. What they hadn't been saying up until this point was why gay people wanted to get married. And that was to sort of, you know, the reason everybody wants to get married, to officially celebrate their love and commitment like absolutely everyone else in society could. So with that in mind, they began to test new ways of framing the issue of marriage equality to see what would most persuade people to support it. And this is what they found. They shifted from the right to marry to the freedom to marry. So just a simple linguistic change. They stopped talking about justice and rights and started talking about love and family. They moved their messaging away from the discrimination of gay people towards messaging about the celebration of love. They stopped talking about gay marriage and they started talking about marriage equality. And in doing so, they framed it, they moved it from being framed as a minority issue to a societal issue that affects all of us. Through talking about these shared values of love, of freedom and love, family, equality, they were able to reframe the issue so that it was relevant to absolutely everybody, not just the LGBT community. They expanded the frame by sharing stories of conservative fathers wanting to walk their lesbian daughters down the aisle, of religious parents wanting their gay son to marry the love of his life, of children wanting their same-sex parents to be able to celebrate their love, of everyday people changing their opinions about marriage equality. And through these stories, people were able to identify with a range of different messengers, reinforcing that this was an issue that affected everybody. I'd really recommend that you guys go away and check out the Freedom to Marry website, because to sort of see their ads in action, because it really is effective and there's a lot that can inspire us in our own communications. Not only did they effectively use shared values to persuade people, they spoke to aspirations as well, of the type of person that people wanted to see themselves as, and the type of society that they wanted to live in, like this aspirational idea. As the founder of the Freedom to Marry campaign said, we turned this from what do you think about gay people to what do you think about your own values. And I think this is a really important quote for us to reflect on as animal advocates. We need to make the issue of animal freedom personally and socially relevant in the same way that Freedom to Marry campaign made marriage equality personally and socially relevant. We need to make animal freedom an issue that's impossible for people to dismiss or disregard. So here at ATT, we're currently doing a lot of research into what shared values and aspirational identities are most persuasive, and we'll be sharing those research findings as we have them, because it's currently proving quite a tricky thing to pin down. I'm going to read this quote out again. We turn this from what do you think about gay people to what do you think about your own values? Just bear that in mind. And it worked. They won. After changing their narrative, they won all 50 US states in just 11 years. After being told, you'll never see gay marriage in your lifetime. And this campaign that was rooted in shared values, in shared aspirations, continues to win worldwide. From this ad alone, this love wins, you can see how they framed it as a win for everybody, not just a win for gay people, because everybody wins from living in a society that respects and values love in all its forms. And that's how we need to communicate our vision for animal freedom. This is something that's going to benefit all of us, not just other animals. And here at Animal Think Tank, we believe that this is key to how we will win. I've spoken a little bit, made a little reference to some of the narrative research we've been doing to better understand people's attitudes and beliefs and opportunities and barriers. We don't want to sort of reinvent the wheel, because there's already a lot of great research out there, both from our own movement and from other movements. So we're compiling reviews of relevant research as well as conducting our own. We're conducting interviews and focus groups with various segments of the UK population. We're running large-scale surveys, we're conducting interviews, and we're doing continuous message testing to better understand what resonates and what doesn't. So I'll take you through the findings of one of these studies now. Mapping the dominant narratives held by the UK public. And this was really to lay the groundwork for all our research. We wanted to identify the dominant narratives held by the UK public, because understanding the narrative landscape is the first step to changing it. We aim to understand the main beliefs and attitudes towards animals in the UK, those that are helpful to our movement, and also the harmful ones that held us back. And finally, we also wanted to get an idea of which narratives were dominant currently in the UK. So to do this, we asked 500 participants who were representative of the UK population, 100 questions, and then we used the results of this to measure the relative dominance of 6 main cultural narratives that emerged. I'll take you through them now. So these cultural narratives are the ones that had the highest public agreement levels. So the first one, which I think we'll all be quite happy to see, is sentientism. So this is an attitude of respect and recognition for other animals' cognitive and emotional abilities, as well as their rights. And we should find it quite encouraging that that has 92% of agreement with our participants representative of the UK population. And I think while it's strange to us that so many people can hold a belief that contradicts the way society as a whole operates, we should also be aware and take hope from this, that this core belief in sentience is a basis for us to build upon. The second one we found, and a much more harmful narrative, and one that's pushed by the industry, is that of economy. So the perceived economic importance of animal agriculture industries, particularly for sustaining rural communities. People are very, very sold, particularly in the UK, they're sold on the idea of British farming and this like imaginary pastoral idyll, this sort of thing that we're told from as soon as we sing Old MacDonald Had a Farm, we experience this. And that was also a very high percentage of agreement, 87%, but not as high as sentientism. So, a good thing, even though it's a harmful narrative, is still pretty high. The third one was welfare. And this is a sort of well-intentioned support for more compassionate treatments of animals and more regulations to ensure animal welfare in farming, which is a sort of convenient myth for the industry that's used to sort of assuage people's guilt that animals in the system have good lives before slaughter, and this has sort of an 86% agreement level. Moving on, the other 3 narratives. The idea of a moral lifestyle. So this is people who endorse veganism and vegetarianism as a beneficial and ethically preferable lifestyle. And that still has 71% of agreement for all our participants. So there's an understanding that eating animals is not the right thing to do, even if they still do it themselves. It's quite a positive thing to see. Number 5 was justification. So we're probably all familiar with this, the belief that eating other animals is acceptable because it's normal, natural, necessary, and nice, the 4 N's. It's probably the narrative that we vegans come up, or, you know, most of us, I assume, are vegans, that we probably encounter most regularly among family and friends. It's surprising to me that it's not as dominant as some of the other narratives, but it is still quite prevalent at 70%. And then finally, the final dominant narrative, this is one that we're going to recognize as well as a pervasive narrative, anthropocentrism. So the view that humans are unique, more valuable, at the top of the hierarchy, and that animals can be exploited by humans as a superior species. It should give us hope, though, I think, that when people actually sit down and think about it, if we think at the beginning, we were talking about 92% of agreement for sentientism. Anthropocentrism, when people sit down and think about it, only has 50% agreement. It might guide a lot of their actions because it's instinctive, but logically, it doesn't hold as much sway. So after we mapped these dominant narratives, we could move on to the next stage. Now we have this basis of understanding of the landscape of people's mental models when it came to animals. And then we could move on to identifying the best narratives to change people's minds. And these are the most persuasive narratives we found so far. So animal abilities. This is the idea that animals have awe-inspiring abilities or intelligence, as well as rich inner lives. So it's kind of like the sentience narrative that's already subscribed to, plus it has a focus on inspiring awe and respect. Social progress, number 2, that animal freedom is the next step in our progress as a society. It's almost the idea that animal freedom is inevitable. You may as well jump on board because we're always on this historical trajectory towards a fairer and more compassionate world. And thirdly, morality. So the idea that it's morally right to support animal freedom. But importantly, morality framed in the positive. So it's morally right to support animal freedom rather than you are morally wrong for eating meat. Seems to have a positive effect on pro-animal sentiment. So to identify these narratives, we used a process called message testing, which I mentioned earlier as one of our work streams in narrative. We came up with a lot of different messages, pulling on lots of different narratives, and then participant read our message, or they watched a video of our message and then answered a questionnaire. And these are the 3 narratives that we found were more likely to result in people saying that they would sign a petition to end factory farming. And they all increase pro-animal sentiment with statistical significance. And that's why we recommend them in our messaging guide. But they aren't new narratives. They have been used in our movement before, but not in a concerted or strategic way. So I'm going to take you through some examples of each now. First of all, animal abilities. Here are some stories that already sort of speak to that. So when people understand other animals and can see them as individuals, they care more deeply about them. So some of these examples, some of you may recognize. Esther the Wonder Pig here on the left. She's shown how each pig is unique. Each pig has their own personality, how they feel, how they relate to themselves and to other people. They have particular likes and dislikes. And there are loads of stories loads of stories of people saying that they've changed how they related to pigs as a result of Esther. Below Esther there, the dodo. This is a popular website and YouTube channel that is really good at sharing inspiring stories of other animals, which helps to, in the dodo's words, make caring about animals a viral cause. And many of their videos do go viral. Like if you've been on the internet at all, you will have probably come across a dodo video, even if you haven't recognized them. They're receiving millions of views. We also see, pulling from the animal abilities narrative ethology books, such as these two great ones from Jonathan Balcombe, so Superfly and What a Fish Knows. They show the incredible abilities of animals, particularly those that are sort of written off as the least sentient or undervalued, insects and fish, who are sort of like classically thought of as not particularly intelligent. But Balcombe is really good at engaging people and explaining their, you know, how their unique abilities are awe-inspiring to humans. Many of you as well might be familiar with the Oscar-winning Netflix documentary My Octopus Teacher on the top right here, and that followed a relationship between an unnamed female octopus and a male diver. And it was very effective, very worth a watch, because it framed the octopus as somebody unique. She was very wise and who had much to teach her human cousin, her human friend. And then finally here on the bottom right, the people with the VR headsets. This was animal equality. They used the VR headsets to show people the perspective of animals trapped in factory farms. And from the reactions just of the people in this picture, you can see that it had like a really profound impact on people, because it asked them to look through the eyes of another and imagine how they would feel in that situation. So all of these are just a few examples of the animal abilities narratives that already exist. And our research shows that this is a narrative we really need to be amplifying as a movement, because it helps people connect with animals in a much deeper way. Secondly, the social progress narrative. This is championing animal freedom, not just being about other animals. It's about our shared commitment to advancing justice as a society. Some of you might have seen the BBC mockumentary here, Carnage, which was written by Simon Amstell. It shows quite a optimistic future where animal exploitation is a thing of the past, and society is in the process of coming to terms with how other animals used to be treated. It's a really clever and funny way to show our future vision, and speaks to this idea that animal freedom is the way forward towards a more compassionate society. And then underneath Carnage, our friends at Pax Fauna, they're a social movement think tank in the US, who will be doing a webinar with us next time, if you'd like to pop along to that one too. They found in their public research that narratives about society evolving together were really persuasive. And then finally, on the right here, the Vegan Society created an ad a few years ago that referenced other social movements. So you can see the suffragettes referenced here, and how at that time change seemed so radical, and that one day, by extension, animal freedom won't seem so radical either. And our third narrative, the morality narrative, and that's the idea that the rights and freedoms of other animals are an ethical imperative for us to support. The Animal Interfaith Alliance here on the left specifically comes at the issue from a faith-based perspective. So they really pull on this morality narrative, particularly the idea of extending the golden rule, do unto others, beyond our own species. Similarly, Peter Singer makes a very influential argument for animal freedom in animal liberation, based on the idea that our moral decision-making should give equal consideration of interest to all beings, the interests of all beings, not just humans. And then finally, Speciesism, the movie, they really tackled this issue head on. They asked people the difficult questions. There's like interviews with a lot of people. It asked difficult questions about their own morality. You can see from the picture here that it plays on ideas of justice with the man and the chicken as having equal moral weight on the scale. Definitely worth a watch. So they were the three narratives that we've identified as persuasive, but there are also other persuasive narratives. I've said this before, but one of the things we don't want to do is reinvent the wheel. So we wanted to also mention some persuasive narratives that work across many social movements and are appropriate for us to use in the animal freedom movement that we accessed via the Public Interest Research Centre. So the first one is the idea of unequal by design. So a narrative that presents the system as designed to benefit a select few with inbuilt with power imbalances as a feature, not a bug of these societies. It's deliberately built in. Number two, a bigger us. So this is a shift away from us versus them thinking towards a more inclusive ideal of solidarity. It really sort of widens the circle of compassion to all beings. You know, it can be race, it can be sexuality, gender identity, but also species too. And then finally, citizens. This is the idea that societal shift is possible through collective action, not just individual change. So this really gets us out of a consumer mindset and thinking about ourselves as a citizen, not a consumer. It really challenges the idea for all social movements that we vote with our wallet rather than taking direct action. So if you want more information on how to implement these narratives and craft messages, and how to leverage the shared values that speak to people's best selves, then our messaging guide will be really useful to you. It goes into a lot more detail than I'm able to today about these narratives and how they can be used. We're intending it as a reference tool for you to have in your arsenal when you're creating messages and, you know, crafting narratives for your campaign. The research report that's linked there as well also digs a lot deeper into how we came to the conclusions we did. So all the facts and figures that came out of our studies that, you know, I can't recall off the top of my head today, but I swear they're all there, and they'll be very interesting. I'll also come back to this QR code at the end, so there'll be time to scan it later. So here's a little peek now on what we'll be looking at over the next few months. Will be our research into the start of 2024 and the end of this year. We'll be looking at what moves people to care about other animals, what kind of people are more likely to care about animal issues as well. We'll also be looking at what issues and practices people are more accepting of and what they're more opposed to. We'll be looking at how we frame ourselves. So values, aspirational identities as motivating factors for taking action, how we frame other animals as well, or particularly how we frame our relationship with other animals. Our research is always evolving, so we hope to come back to you with more updated advice that will be even more targeted as more and more testing takes place, with narratives that are even more effective once we've encountered them. And yeah, we hope you'll watch this space. As well as focusing on story-based strategy, a big part of our work is collaboration. We know that we can only win animal freedom if we have a unified movement that's sharing ideas and working together. And that's why we run annual messaging events. Our last one in February this year brought together over 52 individuals from NGOs, grassroots groups, academics, faith groups, journalists, photographers, filmmakers, storytellers, every sort of like walk of life. We're also collaborating with academics to share ideas and bring in insights. We also consult with others in the movement to gather their knowledge and expertise. And we run roundtables as well to facilitate strategic discussions. And the hope is that with collaborating with many different organizations, both within our movement and outside our movement, we will be able to sort of come together and really make a change here. And finally, running workshops to train people in story-based strategy. Again, watch this space for information on that. And finally, we need this unified story-based strategy. It doesn't matter if we have the best strategy or the best story. We can only create lasting change through working together as a movement. We need all three of these pieces: strategy, narrative, and unity. I'm going to read this quote one more time, just a reminder of those words that the US pollster told the Freedom to Marry campaigners. You'll never see gay marriage in your lifetime, yet they did it in 11 years through a unified story-based strategy. We know that we have a long road ahead of us to get to animal freedom, but if we work together, if we unite behind a long-term strategy and using persuasive narratives that we have been shown to move people, then we can create radical change just like they did. We can show that through achieving animal freedom, everybody wins. So I hope you found this inspiring. If you'd like to find out more about the work we're doing, you can check our website, you can email us, you can sign up for our narrative newsletter via our website and hear about our latest research and upcoming events first. Before we move into questions, I have the QR code for our message guide and research report again, so you can find out more. So please feel free to scan. And I'll leave this up now. I'll move into sort of Q&A if anybody has anything to ask. Do you want
to start with the chat, or Sylvia raised her hand to speak?
Should we have one from the chat and then one from Sylvia, if that's okay?
Okay, so the first, I'm going back up. There was a first question by Krista. Do you have a plan for contemplating other countries and cultures? I don't know if people hear me.
Okay, so do we have a plan for contemplating other cultures? So yes, we are a sort of UK-based organisation, so most of our research will be focused on the UK, but we are collaborating with narrative organisations across the world, Pax Fauna in the US, to name one, but also to kind of like seeding narrative thinking across the world as well. And we will hopefully be sort of sharing information on how to carry out testing to get the winning narratives for, I'll stop sharing now, how to get the winning narratives that work in each specific nationality. So the narratives that work in the UK might not work in Australia, for example, but we may be able to sort of give each other a steer on what to test and how to test. I hope that answers that question. Sylvia, is that good?
Yes, Sylvia had her hand up.
Yeah.
And so I have not necessarily a question. I also have stuff to add, only because I really enjoyed what you were presenting. And I'm a sociologist, but I also graduated last year, animal behavior, welfare, and conservation science. And my research paper was called To Be or Not to Be a Person, an interspecies theory of justice. And this is exactly what I focused on. How can we declare animals a legal person within the UK? And what is also the public opinion? So I created a public consultation, which was sent to UK-based companies as stakeholders, as well as citizens and residents of the UK. And I have identified some of the narratives that you guys have identified. And also the year before, I did another research, which was in anthrozoology, and it was exactly about the social framing and the narratives we create around animals. Last year, when it came to the law, I actually created the Declaration of Fundamental Rights of Non-Human Persons, just as an example in my public consultation for people, what they could experience in case we do get to declare animals non-human persons. one of the things that came through was the fact that people is not necessarily only about narratives. How can we support people practically to get to that point? And this is one of the things that I think is very, very important once we start tackling and getting together in resolving these kind of issues. We need to get to the psychology and sociology of the movement, and then be able not only to create the narratives, but maybe drawing stakeholders and actors that could support us with practicalities of how to do this, not just the words behind it.
Yeah, narrative is one piece of the puzzle. Very, thank you very much for that, Sylvia. That's really interesting. Please, I'd be very interested to read your research. So, hit me up on LinkedIn. Would love to read that. And I'll pass it on to our public research and testing team. I think they'll find that very interesting too. Thank you. Emily, is there?
Yeah, Maria is asking, is raising her hand.
Hi, Maria.
Hi. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was super interesting. I'm Maria. I'm a researcher and teacher of strategic communication here in Lund University in Sweden. And I found your presentation really interesting because you suggest that campaigns should tackle the individuality of the sentient beings, the uniqueness of every individual. And I was researching I was doing almost the contrary work. I was researching on the narrative strategies of the animal exploitation industries, specifically the dairy industry. And one of my findings was that one of the main strategies that they use is precisely this, like the opposite, treating the animals exactly as not individuals, non-sentient, not unique. So it's very interesting that our research merges here somehow.
It is very interesting, isn't it? I think as it shows that the most dominant narrative here in the UK was sentientism. It's, that's, I think that the industry has had to do a lot of unlearning, has had to promote a lot of unlearning to allow this to happen. But still, we have that baseline understanding that is there for us to build on. So yeah, it is really interesting how we seem to have looked at like two sides of the coin there, that to fix the problem, or what seems to fix the problem of people's perceptions there, is to just kind of rebuild from that basis that has been eroded. So yeah, thank you. Do you have any more in the chat, Emily?
It's not part of the question, but it could be a question. Serenity was saying, I wonder how much the prevalence of certain narratives vary by religion, age, gender, etc.
Oh, so do I. That's something that we are hoping to get into within the next year to couple of years. I'm particularly interested in developing, so my background, to give you a little bit of context, is marketing. And I'm really interested in developing psychographics for sort of supporters and detractors for animal freedom. So like what kind of person agrees, what kind of person doesn't, what kind of person is persuadable as well. So yeah, that's definitely on our radar.
And then there's like lots of comments, but no particular questions in the chat.
If anybody would like to stick their hand up, you can ask anything.
There's a new question in the chat. You attribute the success of freedom to the narrative change, but how can you be sure this was the main cause?
It wasn't the main cause, but it was the thing that shifted the zeitgeist, if that makes sense. It wasn't. So there was decades and decades of excellent campaigning in the gay liberation movement that cannot be, which formed an excellent foundation. But when they reached that sort of point of not changing minds, it was changing the narrative that gave it that push into the sort of larger public arena of agreement, if that makes sense. But yeah.
We have Chetan raising his hand.
Oh,
Hi everyone. My question is regarding animal rebellion, and they have been using a narrative about love for animals, or UK is a land of animal lovers, which kind of is a bit of deceiving message, because when you look at the rights-based perspective, you don't need to love somebody to respect their right. And I'm not sure if this is the kind of narrative because animal rebellion is more like a prominent animal organization right now in UK, which has been doing a lot of direct action and other things, and calling UK the land of animal lovers is kind of a bit strange.
It's a well-known phrase in the UK. Like we often describe ourselves as a nation of animal lovers. It's a bit of a stock phrase that we use. So I can see why they've chosen that particular narrative to try and pull on, because it pulls on the British national identity. But obviously to us it can seem a little bit of a strange thing to say, considering what goes on in the UK. So we've done some research into identities, and one of the identities that we looked at was if you appeal to people's identities as an animal lover, does that shift their pro-animal sentiment? And we didn't find any conclusive results either way. We didn't see any major change. We didn't see any major detraction. It was just versus the control message. It wasn't statistically different. So that's not to say that it's not an effective narrative to pull on. It may just be that we didn't encounter it being so. Maybe the way that we leveraged the narrative wasn't particularly good. Maybe if we were to write another message written differently, it would have an effect. So I don't want to say that the Animal Rising is doing the wrong thing, because I simply don't have that information. But yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I agree with you, but I guess I always come at it from the perspective of, yeah, you don't have to love someone to respect their rights, but if animal lover, if leveraging that identity is what shifts public opinion, then I would probably leverage it before I sort of made the point about rights, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, so coming further on that, for an example, if because you mentioned about the unity in the movement and the other organizations don't agree with that of the animal, how would you have unity?
So by showing that it works, hopefully, by being able to show other organizations that if we don't all have to be, this is the thing with narrative, we don't all have to be literally saying the same thing. We have an idiom here in the UK, singing from the same hymn sheet, which means that everybody's saying the same thing and spouting the same ideas. When it comes to narrative, I don't want everybody singing from the same hymn sheet. I don't want us all saying the same thing. I want, we in narrative believe that we have to be sort of in the same house of worship. That's it. Just in the same church, in the same building. As long as we're pulling on narratives that work, that are applicable to a great number of circumstances and a great number of messages that don't all have to be saying the exact same words in the exact same way, we will hopefully be able to shift public opinion. Does that answer?
Thank you, Beth.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Any other questions? Let me have a look. It's a little difficult for me to check.
Yeah, Maria put a link to a research video. Research.
Oh, thank you for that, Maria. That's very useful. Thank you. I'll take a look at that later. Okay. Okay.
No new questions.
So unless we have any more, I'm just going to share my screen one more time to plug next month's webinar, where you'll be able to hear from, come on, there we go. So next time we'll be having a guest speaker in this webinar slot. So this will be Aidan from Pax Fauna. So he'll be presenting his findings from years of research on public opinion and narrative in the US, and animal advocacy in the US. So looking at how we solve the problem of animal advocacy being seen as emotionally manipulative by the public, which is obviously a bit of a conundrum in that it's inherently an emotional issue, yet that's an accusation that gets leveraged a lot, that we're being emotionally manipulative. So Aidan will be talking about that and his research. We hope you'll join us. There's another QR code there, but you'll also be able to find this on our LinkedIn, on our website, and on our Eventbrite. So thank you very much, everybody. It's been great to talk to you today. Yeah, thank you very much. Have a lovely evening.
It was lovely meeting you, and thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Bye.